When my son handed me a crumpled $50 gift card on Mother's Day, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood the price of being forgotten. Moments earlier, he had gifted a brand new Mercedes to his father-in-law, in front of family, friends, and hundreds on live stream. I stood there, invisible, holding a handmade garden kit I spent 2 months saving for, while strangers asked, "Who's that old lady?" That old lady was the woman who raised him alone, worked 3 jobs, and sold her dreams so he could chase his. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I went home, made tea, and opened my bank statements. What I discovered next wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And in that quiet, bitter moment, I made a decision. Not for revenge, not for pity, but for my own dignity. This is the story of how I stopped being a mother and started being a woman again. I used to believe that sacrifices made for love would always come back tenfold. That years of sleepless nights, double shifts, and dreams quietly shelved would one day be acknowledged with open arms and grateful eyes. That belief kept me moving for nearly 4 decades, until one bright floral-scented Sunday in May, it didn't. I had spent 2 months saving for the gift. A handcrafted Italian gardening set, polished wood handles, engraved steel tools, packed in a velvet-lined box. Ethan had once casually mentioned how he wished he had real tools like the ones Grandpa used to have. I had remembered. Of course I had. I remember everything he says, even when he doesn't. Every word from him lives somewhere in me, like a stored lullaby I still hum alone. Mother's Day was my favorite day, not because of gifts or flowers, but because it meant maybe, just maybe, I'd sit at a table surrounded by my son's family, his wife Camila's laughter echoing, and my grandsons, Noah and Liam, sneaking extra cookies when they thought no one noticed. It meant I'd belong. I wore my nicest lavender dress. I even curled my hair and dabbed on a little perfume. I bought Camila a bouquet of hydrangeas and a chocolate box for the boys. I loaded the gardening kit into the trunk of my old Corolla and smiled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Today will be good," I whispered. As I drove to Ethan's house, a sprawling 2-story in the suburbs I helped fund through early retirement withdrawals, I imagined the look on his face when he opened the gift. "Mom, you really didn't have to," he'd say. I'd pretend to scold him, but deep down, I'd melt. We'd laugh, we'd talk, maybe even dance with the boys in the backyard. When I arrived, the driveway was packed. Balloons fluttered on the mailbox, and soft music spilled from the backyard. I hadn't been told there'd be a party, but I assumed it was a surprise. How lovely, I thought. A celebration for all the mothers in the family. I walked through the side gate, the box held tightly in both arms, and froze. Ethan was standing near a sleek, silver Mercedes-Benz, the sun gleaming off its hood like a spotlight. His arm was around Luis, Camila's father, as dozens of guests clapped, phones held high. Camila stood off to the side, live streaming the moment, her voice excited. "Guys, look what Ethan got for my dad, a brand new Mercedes. Isn't he just the best son-in-law?" Laughter, cheers, flashbulbs. My son reached into his pocket, pulled out the keys, and handed them to Luis. "Happy Father's Day!" he beamed. "You deserve it." Luis hugged him like he'd won the lottery. "You didn't have to do this, mijo," he chuckled. "What an incredible gift." I stood there, invisible, a pale woman in a lavender dress, holding a velvet box no one noticed. Noah tugged at Liam's sleeve and whispered, "Is that Grandma?" But neither of them approached. I stayed rooted until Ethan finally noticed me. "Mom, you made it," he said, hurrying over. He didn't hug me. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a wrinkled envelope. "Here, this is for you." I looked at it. A $50 department store gift card. Folded, no note, no name. I forced a smile. "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded, distracted, already turning back toward Luis and the admiring crowd. I didn't say another word. I placed the envelope into my purse, walked slowly to a quiet patio corner, and sat. The gardening kit rested on my lap. I didn't open it. I watched the celebration from a distance. Camilla posed with her father beside the Mercedes, grinning into every camera. Guests circled around, touching the leather interior and making jokes about when it's their turn to marry rich. Ethan soaked it all in. My son, who once cried because a paper butterfly he made in kindergarten tore in half, now smiled like he hadn't seen me. No one asked me to join them. No one noticed when I quietly stood up, walked back through the gate, and drove home without dinner. I was halfway to the gate when someone called out, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you?" I turned. A woman in her early 40s, wearing a floral dress and heels far too thin for grass, squinted at me. I recognized her from Camilla's Instagram. One of her colleagues, Clara maybe? Carla? She looked at the box in my hands and smiled politely, as if I'd stumbled into the wrong backyard. "Are you one of the caterers?" she asked. Sorry, who are you? The question sliced through the air like a dull blade. Not malicious, just casual, unknowing. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I could have said, "I'm Ethan's mother," or "I changed his diapers when he had the flu at 5, or "I sold my wedding ring so he could pay for college applications." But I didn't. "I was just leaving," I said instead. She smiled again, relieved, and turned away to rejoin the laughter. I reached the front yard just as the clouds cracked open. Fat raindrops began falling in slow bursts, dotting the sidewalk like tiny stains. By the time I reached the Corolla, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. I opened the driver's door, carefully placing the still unopened gardening kit on the passenger seat. My fingers shook as I tried to twist the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, then wheezed, then died. I tried again and again. Nothing. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see guests huddling under the awning, still smiling, sipping wine. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Then another voice piped up, louder. "Is that Grandma's car?" It was Noah. A pause. "That's not a car," Liam's voice answered. "That's garbage on wheels." They both burst into giggles. My heart cracked. But not from their words, from the ease with which they'd said them, as if I were some relic of inconvenience they hadn't been taught to treasure. I had knit their baby blankets, sewn their Halloween costumes, left warm pies on their doorstep every Sunday for years. But none of that lived in their memories, only in mine. I took a deep breath, tried the key once more. The engine sputtered, then roared reluctantly to life. I didn't wait for it to change its mind again. I reversed out of the driveway and turned the corner, hands clenched tightly on the wheel. I didn't cry. Not when I got caught in the red light 3 blocks away. Not when the windshield wipers made that annoying rubber squeak I kept forgetting to fix. Not when the gift card slipped from my purse onto the floor unnoticed. When I reached my little house, still half painted from a project Ethan never finished, I parked in the garage and turned off the engine. The silence hit me like a wave. I sat there for a long time. The gift sat on the seat beside me, untouched. The box was damp now from my coat, the velvet darker in places. I traced the outline of one of the trowels through the packaging. The wood had been imported from northern Italy, sanded by hand, a luxury for a man who once cried over a toy truck he couldn't fix, a man who used to call me his queen of dirt when I gardened. I picked up the gift card from the floor and turned it over. No signature, no note. Just the store's embossed logo and the number 50 in gold lettering. It could have been a prize from a cereal box. I placed it on the table, washed my hands, changed out of my lavender dress, and put on my old flannel robe. I made a cup of tea, Earl Grey, extra honey. I sat at the window and watched the rain fall steadily on my flower beds, camellias, Ethan's favorite as a child. I sipped my tea slowly, each swallow settling deep into the hollow places that had opened in me today. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't post anything cryptic on Facebook like other mothers might. I I didn't demand an explanation because somewhere in that moment of invisible heartbreak, I realized something. I didn't want to be remembered out of guilt. I wanted to be seen out of love. And until that happened, silence was the only dignity I had left. The Monday after Mother's Day, I woke up earlier than usual. I hadn't slept well. Something inside me felt wrong. Not just the obvious pain, not just the echo of laughter that wasn't mine, or the gift card that still lay untouched on my kitchen table. It was something deeper, an unease I couldn't shake. I sat at the table with my tea, staring at my checkbook. It had been a long time since I'd gone through my finances in detail. Most months, I let the automatic payments run their course. My pension covered the basics, and I still had money from the house I sold after Ethan finished medical school. But now I felt the need to know, to really know. I pulled out a drawer where I kept my bank documents, statements, receipts, letters, years' worth, neatly stacked. I opened the most recent one and began reading, expecting nothing more than routine. But then, a $15,000 wire transfer caught my eye to an account under Ethan's name, dated just 2 weeks ago. I didn't remember authorizing that. I flipped to the previous month. Another $15,000, then another, then one for $20,000 labeled investment assistance, then $25,000 marked clinic renovation. My hands trembled as I kept flipping. Medical supplies advance, family emergency, child education fund. On and on it went. I spent the entire afternoon combing through 2 years of records, line by line, page by page, cross-referencing every transaction. And when the calculator on my phone finally stopped, I stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed me. $412,000 gone. To my son, without a single word of explanation. My breath caught. The room spun. I had sold my wedding band, my art collection, even the lake cabin, everything I had kept after my husband's death to make sure Ethan had no debt when he started his practice. And yet, he had drained me. I picked up the phone and called him. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Hey, Mom," he said cheerily, as if nothing had happened. "Sorry about yesterday, things were chaotic. Camilla's family, Ethan," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was going through my bank records this morning. Can you explain why there have been hundreds of thousands of dollars transferred to your account?" There was silence on the line, then a laugh, soft, nervous. "Oh, Mom, I think that must be a mistake. Probably some mix-up. I'll talk to the bank. You don't need to stress about it." "I'm not stressed," I said, now calm in a way that frightened even me. "I'm asking you for a direct answer. Did you authorize those transfers? Did you use my account to fund all of this?" Another pause. "Look," he finally said, it was supposed to be temporary. Some medical equipment purchases for the clinic, Stuff we needed urgently. I didn't want to worry you, so I used the authorization from last year when I helped set up your online banking. You used my trust as a tool, I whispered. You took from me, and you didn't ask. Not even once. I was going to pay it back, he said, more firmly now. You have to believe that. With what, Ethan? Your private school tuition for the boys, your new apartment, the Mercedes for Luis? That's different, he snapped. That was an investment in my future. Luis knows people. He can get me a position on the hospital board. Do you know what that means for my career? I laughed then. I couldn't help it. A short, bitter sound that startled even me. You took over $400,000 from your mother, I said, to impress your wife's father. You betrayed me for status, for show. You don't understand, he said. This is how the world works now. Relationships are strategic. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. No, Ethan, that's how cowards work. He exhaled loudly. Look, just let me fix this, okay? I'll call the bank. I'll sort the transfers out. Don't make this bigger than it is. It's already bigger, I said softly. Because it's no longer about money. It's about what I now know, about who you've become. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there, alone in the stillness, the stack of bank statements now scattered across my kitchen table. The numbers didn't lie. But for 2 years, my son had. And that broke something in me far deeper than any theft ever could. The next morning, I took a walk to the local bank branch. Not to cause a scene, just to ask a simple question. How? Linda Perez was behind the glass counter. We'd gone to high school together, lost touch, then reconnected over town hall meetings. She was now assistant branch manager and always greeted me with that same soft warmth she used to have as a teenager. "Margaret?" she said with surprise. "You don't usually come in person." "I need to see some original documents from my account," I replied, "particularly anything signed in the last 2 years. She furrowed her brow, nodded, and motioned for me to follow her into a side office. After confirming my identity, she pulled up a file and turned the screen toward me. "There are a few authorizations here. One is from last April, an automatic transfer set up to an external account. Here's the e-signature on file." I leaned closer. My name was typed out neatly, but the signature underneath it? That wasn't mine. My hand trembled. I pointed at the screen. "That's not my signature." Linda looked closer. Her expression shifted from casual to concerned. "Margaret, are you saying this was forged?" "I'm saying," I said slowly, "that my son had access to my online banking, and this isn't the only transaction." Her lips parted, but she caught herself. She knew the legal limits of her role. "Would you like me to escalate this to our fraud department?" "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I just needed to see the truth." She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry." I nodded, gathering the printouts she'd made. "Thank you, Linda. You've given me what I came for." On the walk home, I didn't feel fury. I didn't feel grief. I felt finality. When I arrived home, I took a breath, sat at my desk, and began. I logged into my bank account and canceled every automatic transfer. I requested new cards, revoked all secondary access. Deus. I changed my passwords, PINs, challenge questions, and updated my contact info. I even called my investment account manager to put an alert on any withdrawal requests. Within the hour, I was no longer a source of cash flow for Ethan Caldwell. And then, as if summoned by some cosmic thread, he showed up. The knock on the door wasn't gentle. It was sharp, impatient. I opened it to find Ethan standing in my porch, face flushed with anger. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked, stepping inside without invitation. "You cut everything off? My clinic card declined today in front of a supplier." I said nothing. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and returned calmly. "You forged my signature," I said plainly. His mouth opened, then shut. "You used my name to drain my life savings, and now you're yelling at me because I finally said no?" "That was for us," he exploded. "The clinic, the boy's future. Luis had connections." "Don't," I cut in. "Don't you dare use your children as an excuse. Don't you dare use Luis as a cover for what you did." "You've sabotaged everything," he growled. "Do you even understand what kind of damage this does to my reputation? My future?" "I'm sorry, your image is more important than your integrity," I replied. He stepped back, pacing, rubbing his temples. "Mothers don't do this to their sons. You're supposed to support me." "Support?" I echoed. "Is that what this was to you? A support line? A free-flowing account with no boundaries?" He stopped. I looked him dead in the eye. "Do you think I'm your mother? Or your bank?" He didn't answer. "I gave you everything," I said, voice steady. "Not just money, my time, my youth, my dreams. I gave until I forgot what was mine. And you stood there last Sunday and handed a man you've known 2 years a car, while giving me a crumpled gift card." He looked away. "I'm done, Ethan," I finished. "This was never about money. It's about respect. About the fact that you lost the right to call yourself my son the moment you saw me as a transaction. He stood frozen. Then, coldly, he turned toward the door. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You'll be alone. You'll see." And without another word, he walked out, never looking back. I closed the door behind him, locked it. And for the first time in a very long time, I exhaled without fear of who might call next. The silence of the house was deafening. For the first time in decades, there were no shoes by the front door, no toys underfoot, no crayon drawings on the fridge from the boys, no late-night calls from Ethan asking for a little help just until payday. The quiet was not peaceful, not yet. It felt like the absence of air, as if someone had sliced the umbilical cord that tethered me to everything I had known. The mornings were the hardest. I would wake up early, still half dreaming that I needed to pack lunch for Ethan or that Camilla was dropping off the boys. Then I'd open my eyes and remember, there were no more drop-offs, no more calls. I was alone, and I had chosen it. I filled the void with tasks. I repainted the guest room. I cleaned out closets. I alphabetized the spice rack. But every night when the house quieted again, the weight of absence returned. And then, one Thursday afternoon, it arrived. A letter from the courthouse. Pale yellow envelope, black ink, stiff paper. Notice of civil action was stamped across the top. I sat at the table with the envelope unopened for nearly an hour. I didn't want to know. I already knew. When I finally read it, the words barely registered. Misappropriation of joint financial resources. Unlawful withholding of family assets. Seeking restitution. Ethan had filed a lawsuit against me, his own mother, for the money he had stolen. He claimed I was hiding marital assets, a term that didn't even apply to me, that I had cut him off unfairly, that I had interfered with his right to shared family finances. He was suing me for financial abuse. The betrayal was no longer just personal. It was now legal, public, cold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then I walked to the garage and pulled down the old storage trunk labeled Frank's Things. Inside, the scent of cedar still lingered. My husband's handwriting greeted me on a faded label, letters, sketches, journal. I hadn't opened that trunk in years. Frank had died when Ethan was 11. A stroke, sudden and cruel. After that, everything became about survival, about making sure Ethan never felt that emptiness. I worked double shifts, turned down dates, holidays, even job promotions, because they would take me away from him. I thought I was shielding him. I was actually building a cage around both of us. I reached in and pulled out the leather-bound journal, the one Frank wrote in after Ethan was born. I'd always been too afraid to read it, too busy, too tired, too unsure of what he'd written. Now I opened to the first page. If you're reading this, Margie, it means I'm not around to help. So here's the truth. His handwriting was shaky but strong. I turned the pages slowly, each one dated. Notes about baby Ethan's first steps, his first word, how he liked peas but hated carrots, how he threw tantrums when he didn't get his way. Then this entry dated March 5th, 1996. We have to be careful not to mistake love for protection. Ethan has a sharp mind, but he already knows how to manipulate when it suits him. He's only 6. We need to let him fail sometimes. Need to let him hear the word no. If we don't, we'll raise a man who believes the world owes him something. I read it 3 times, and then again, and again. The words sank deep into the hollows Ethan had left behind. Frank had seen it. Even then, I had ignored it. I thought more love would fix everything. More money, more support, more silence. But what I gave wasn't love. It was fear in disguise. Fear of being the only parent. Fear of losing Ethan to bitterness. Fear of not being enough. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest. "I'm sorry, Frank," I whispered. "You were right." Outside, the sun was setting in a bath of orange and gold. The camellias glowed in the light, petals open and fragile. I walked out barefoot, stood among them, and let the wind hit my face. For the first time, I didn't feel fragile. I felt awake. That night, after reading Frank's journal, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster. Each one felt like a fracture in the life I thought I had. I realized then that I had been waiting for a moment that would never come. Waiting for Ethan to change, to wake up one morning and remember who I was to him. But some awakenings don't happen until after the world has gone quiet. By morning, I had made a decision. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account, not to check for more damage, but to finally take control. The balance was still sizable, even after the theft. Years of saving, penny by penny, every vacation skipped, every coat worn one winter too long. It had been for Ethan, all of it. But now, it would be for me. I clicked transfer and moved the remainder of my funds to a new private account. Then I did something I hadn't dared to do in 40 years. I booked a ticket to Alaska. It was a dream from my youth. Frank and I had always planned to go, back when we were newly married and full of big plans. Life happened, and then death, and then Ethan. But now, finally, there was nothing stopping me. 3 days later, I boarded a plane to Anchorage with nothing but a suitcase, a coat that still smelled of cedar, and the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The cold hit me like truth. Sharp, undeniable. The air was cleaner than I remembered from any place I'd been, and somehow, so was my mind. On the second day, during a glacier tour in Kenai Fjords, I met Eleanor. She was seated beside me on the boat, wrapped in a wool scarf and sipping coffee from a travel mug that said, "Not all those who wander are lost." We chatted easily, as if we'd known each other in another life. She was 72, originally from Montana, a widow too. But her story unraveled slowly, in layers. "My son was an addict," she said one afternoon, as we sat watching orcas in the distance. "He stole from me, from his siblings, pawned everything I had. I paid for rehab 4 times. He promised to change every time, but he didn't." She didn't cry as she said it. Her voice was steady, worn but steady. "One day," she continued, "he broke into my house and stole my wedding ring. That was the last straw. I changed the locks. Haven't spoken to him in 15 years. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "I mourned it," she said, "but I don't regret it. There's a difference. Mourning means you acknowledge the loss. Regret is when you wish you'd done it differently. I did what I had to do to survive. I had to choose me." Choose me. The words echoed in my chest. She leaned in, eyes kind. "You don't owe your children the destruction of yourself. That's not motherhood, that's martyrdom, and no one builds statues for martyrs anymore." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both sat there, 2 women who had given everything and then been brave enough to stop. That night, back in my lodge room, I stood by the window looking out at the snowy wilderness. My heart felt strangely light. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from Ethan. "Mom, please, I lost everything. Camilla left. I'm being sued by the clinic. I'm out of work. I'm sleeping in Luis's garage. Please, can you help me one last time?" My hand trembled as I held the phone. The message was short. "No, I'm sorry. No, I was wrong. Just another request, another crisis, another emergency that was suddenly mine to fix." I sat down on the edge of the bed. Outside, the northern lights began to shimmer in the sky, waves of green and purple flickering like magic. I looked at the message again, then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't reply. When I returned from Alaska, the house no longer felt like a cage. The stillness that once gnawed at my ribs now felt gentle, like a companion instead of a punishment. My first morning back, I stood at the window with my tea and watched the early spring sunlight stretch across the kitchen tiles. The camellias were blooming again, soft pinks and whites opening slowly, bravely, as if testing the air. I didn't rush to check the mailbox. I didn't scan for messages. I didn't wonder who needed me that day. No one did, and strangely, that felt like peace. I spent that week reorganizing the pantry, but not out of habit, out of intention. I read the labels, threw out the cans with expired dates, and made room for things I actually wanted. Lavender tea, imported olive oil, real saffron. I even bought a small basil plant and placed it near the window where it could soak in the morning light. That plant was my first step towards something new. Eleanor had given me a book before I left Alaska, The Beginner's Guide to Growing Herbs Indoors. I read it cover to cover, made notes in the margins, and visited the local nursery the following week. I came home with rosemary, thyme, mint, and a tiny sage bush. The kitchen windowsill transformed into a little sanctuary of green. Next came the cooking. For years, I'd only made meals that Ethan liked or what the boys would eat without complaint. I knew every shortcut, every brand of boxed mac and cheese, every way to hide vegetables in pasta sauce. But now, for the first time, I cooked for myself. I roasted garlic until it turned sweet and sticky. I made soups that simmered for hours. I baked bread that filled the house with warmth. I even poured myself a glass of wine with dinner. Not out of habit, but because I liked the taste. Each small act was a reclamation. I dusted off an old watercolor set I'd shoved to the back of the hall closet years ago. I had bought it after seeing a painting class on TV, thinking I'd try it someday. Someday never came, until now. The first strokes were awkward, hesitant, but something about the way the color bled into wet paper, the unpredictability of it, reminded me of life itself. I painted herbs, flowers, the corner of my kitchen with the basil plant in morning sun. They weren't masterpieces, but they were mine. One afternoon, I saw a flyer at the library. Salsa for seniors. No partner needed. I almost laughed out loud. I had 2 left feet and the rhythm of a filing cabinet, but I folded the flyer neatly and tucked it into my purse anyway. 3 Thursdays later, I stood in a studio filled with gray hair, squeaky sneakers, and more laughter than I'd heard in months. I stepped on toes, missed beats, and twirled the wrong way more than once. But I danced, and I didn't feel ridiculous. I felt alive. Eleanor and I kept in touch. Weekly phone calls turned into daily voice notes, each one full of encouragement or dry humor. She called my herb garden Margaret's Rebellion. I called her porch in Montana Eleanor's Throne. One morning, during a video call, she leaned close to the screen and said, "You know, freedom isn't about being alone. It's about not being controlled." I stared at her. "You're not free when someone owns your guilt," she continued, "or your silence, or your money. You're free when you can choose, really choose, what your days look like." She smiled, the kind of smile only women who've walked through fire can wear. "And you, my dear," she said, "are finally choosing." Her words settled into me like spring rain into soil. That night, I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by rosemary and sage, and wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I wrote not about Ethan, not about pain or loss, but about basil leaves and garlic and the dance steps I almost remembered. I realized something then. Healing doesn't always look like confrontation or apologies. Sometimes healing looks like rosemary growing by the window, or laughter during a salsa misstep, or a warm loaf of bread split between one plate and one chair. I was not who I used to be, and I didn't need to be. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was kneading dough on the kitchen counter, humming along to an old jazz record. The scent of rosemary and rising yeast filled the air. Beethoven, my black mutt adopted from the shelter months ago, lifted his head but didn't bark. Just a low, curious grunt. I wiped my hands, opened the door, and froze. Camilla stood there, soaked from the drizzle, her long brown hair pulled into a loose braid. Behind her, Peter and Michael huddled close, shivering. Their backpacks were worn, and Michael clutched a half-broken toy car. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Camilla whispered, "Hi, Margaret, I didn't know where else to go." I stepped aside silently, motioning them in. The boys dropped their bags and ran straight to Beethoven, who wagged his tail and offered gentle sniffs like they were old friends returning from war. "I'm sorry," Camilla said, her voice already cracking, "for everything." She looked exhausted, darker circles under her eyes, thinner frame, voice hollow with weeks of strain. "Ethan, he left," she continued. "Just packed up and disappeared one morning. No note, no explanation. The rent's 3 months overdue. The school called about unpaid fees, and I'm working double shifts just to keep the lights on." I sat across from her at the table. The dough still lay on the counter, forgotten. "And now you're here," I said, not coldly, but not warmly either. "I didn't come to ask for money," she said quickly. I didn't know what else to do. The boys kept asking for you. I told them what happened, what their father did, and they still said, 'We want Grandma.'" I glanced over at Peter, now drawing with a pencil on an old receipt. Michael was petting Beethoven with such reverence it made my heart ache. "I can take them in," I said finally. "They're my grandchildren. They have a home here, always will." Camilla nodded, tears welling. "But you," I continued, "I won't support financially." She stiffened slightly. "I'm sorry," I added, "but I won't rebuild what Ethan destroyed. I can offer you dinner, company, even a place to rest if needed, but I won't be your provider. Not again. That chapter of my life is closed." Camilla let the silence settle before nodding. "I understand," she whispered. "That's more than fair." That evening, I found Peter asleep on the sofa, a blanket draped over him like a shield. Michael had fallen asleep on the floor next to Beethoven, one hand still on the dog's fur. Camilla was in the guest room, eyes closed but not yet sleeping. I stood in the doorway for a long while before whispering, "You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for." She didn't open her eyes, but a single tear slipped down her cheek. Days passed, the house filled with laughter again. Peter loved the herb garden. He gave each plant a name. Michael tried painting beside me, turning a mess of color into what he claimed was a super volcano. Camilla got a part-time job at the library. She walked there, brought books home, read stories aloud at night. She didn't ask for anything else. One evening, after the boys were tucked in, I returned from the grocery store and saw him, sitting on the front steps, so thin I almost didn't recognize him. Ethan. His hair was longer now, messy, clothes wrinkled, shoulders slumped. He looked up at me like a man who'd lost the map of the world. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stood by the driveway, grocery bags still in hand, the wind gently tugging at my coat. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he added quickly, voice raspy. "I know I don't deserve it." I said nothing. He swallowed. "I've lost everything. Camilla, the boys, the clinic, my reputation. I've been living in hostels, getting day jobs when I can, cleaning bathrooms at gas stations, waiting tables." He looked away. Turns out the world doesn't think much of a doctor with no license, no references, and a public lawsuit. The silence between us was thick. "I guess I just wanted to sit here," he whispered, "just to be near something familiar, even if I'm not welcome inside." I walked up the steps slowly, groceries still hanging from my arms. He stood to leave. "You don't have to go," I said quietly, "but you can't stay either. Not tonight." He nodded, brushing something from his eye. "Fair enough." As he turned to go, he hesitated. "Tell the boys I miss them." I watched him walk down the path, into the darkness. I didn't stop him, but I also didn't turn away. Because for the first time, Ethan didn't demand, didn't manipulate, didn't justify. He simply sat and admitted he was lost. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of something real. A week passed before Ethan returned. This time, he didn't sit on the steps. He knocked. 3 gentle taps, barely audible. I opened the door to find him holding a worn-out canvas backpack, the kind students carried in college. His shoes were caked with mud. His eyes were no longer desperate, just tired. "I'm not here to stay," he said, "but I'd like to talk, if that's okay." I nodded and led him to the back porch. We sat beneath the climbing jasmine, the scent sharp and oddly comforting. Ethan didn't speak right away. He took a long breath and looked out over the garden, where Peter and Michael had planted their first tomato sprouts just days earlier. "Luis fired me," he began. I raised an eyebrow. He'd hinted at the loss before, but not the story behind it. He said I was a liability, that my drama with the family was bad for the clinic's reputation. One morning I showed up and my key card didn't work, just like that. Gone. I said nothing. "I lost the apartment the next month," he continued. "Then the car. Everything was in Camila's name or financed with your credit, so when you pulled out, well, the whole thing collapsed." He wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Just stating facts. I moved into a rental behind a diner. It smells like bacon grease and mildew, but it's cheap. I started taking odd jobs, dishwashing, cleaning. He paused. Then I saw a flyer at the community center. They were looking for someone to run basic health workshops for low-income families. I signed up, told them I was a doctor, but I'd lost my license temporarily. They didn't care. Said the kids just needed someone who knew how to explain things simply. For the first time in years, I saw something flicker across his face. Pride. I teach them how to brush properly, how to read nutrition labels, what to do if someone faints. Nothing fancy. But they listen, they laugh, they ask questions no one's ever answered. A long pause followed. Then he turned to me, voice lower. "I want to fix this, Mom. Not because I need your money, but because I miss my family. I miss you, and I know now I failed. Not just as a son, but as a man." I didn't answer right away. I stood, went inside, and returned with a folded piece of paper. It was a list, 10 handwritten points. I handed it to him. He unfolded it slowly. 10 things you must do in 6 months to earn forgiveness, the header read. His eyes moved down the list, and his breath caught. Volunteer twice a week with no pay. Apply for a legitimate recertification program. Write a full apology letter, no excuses, to Camilla. Spend 1 full weekend a month with the boys, no gifts, just presents. Pay back at least $500 to your own savings account. Attend therapy, weekly. Donate 1 valuable possession to someone who needs it more. Send 1 letter to your father, Frank, reflecting on what you learned. Call your grandmother once a month, not for advice, just to listen. Do not, under any circumstances, ask me for money. When he finished reading, his hands trembled slightly. "This isn't punishment," I said. "It's a path. If you walk it, I'll meet you on the other side." His voice was hoarse. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the easiest," I replied. "The kids need someone to read to them on Saturdays." He looked up, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he smiled. Not a fake, polished grin, but something raw, earned. "Okay," he said. "I'll try." "No," I corrected gently. "You'll do. Trying is what got us here. Doing is what brings you home." That evening, I watched him walk away again, but this time he wasn't running. He was building, and for the first time, I didn't see a man who had failed me. I saw a son, learning how to begin again. In the months that followed, Ethan became a ghost of his former self, but in the best way. Gone was the polished, entitled man in tailored suits, driving leased cars and speaking in rehearsed charm. The new Ethan arrived on foot, always a little early, often carrying a worn backpack and sometimes a thermos of homemade tea. His hair was shorter now, his posture straighter. He spoke less, but when he did, I listened. He came every third Sunday, rain or shine. No requests, no stories laced with hidden demands, just conversation. Sometimes about the boys, how Peter had taken up chess, how Michael had joined the school choir. Sometimes about his new job, how the clinic in the low-income district was run down but full of patients who were kind, grateful, human. Once, he said, "It feels good to be useful." He always brought something small, a newspaper article about a local herb farm, a new salsa CD he found at a thrift store, a jar of pickles he'd made himself. I accepted each with quiet gratitude. Sometimes we sat in silence on the porch, sipping tea and watching the garden grow. Sometimes we walked down to the lake near the edge of the neighborhood where Frank used to take Ethan fishing. It was on one such afternoon in early autumn that Ethan said, "There's something I want to give you." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a flat-wrapped parcel. Brown paper tied with twine. No gift bag, no card. "Don't open it yet," he said. "Wait until I'm gone." That night, after the dishes were washed and the house had gone quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table and untied the twine. Inside was a canvas, a painting. Crude, honest brushstrokes, but I recognized it instantly. It was the lake. Our lake. In the foreground were two figures, one small boy and one older woman, sitting side by side on the wooden dock. No faces, just outlines, but the posture was unmistakable. I remembered that day. Ethan had scraped his knee climbing a tree. I'd cleaned the wound with water from the lake, tore a strip from my scarf to bandage it, and we'd sat there as the sun dipped low, saying nothing, just watching the ripples. It was the first time he'd said, "I love you," without words. And now, 30 years later, he said it again, with color, texture, and silence. Taped to the back of the canvas was a note. "I never knew what to give you that was truly mine. This is the first thing I made with my own hands, with no one else's help, with no money that wasn't earned. Thank you for not giving up on me even when you should have." I pressed the canvas to my chest and wept, not the tight, shameful tears of the past years, but deep, open sobs that left me cleansed, the kind of crying you do when your body finally says, "I'm ready to let go." I hadn't cried in 3 years, not when I cut off his money, not when he sued me, not when I sat alone in Alaska wondering what kind of mother I had been, but this small, imperfect painting cracked the dam. It wasn't the skill, it was the sacrifice. The time it must have taken him to sit down and paint, the courage to give me something that couldn't be bought, borrowed, or stolen. It was his, entirely his, and it was mine now. The next time he visited, I had the painting framed and hung above the fireplace. He noticed it the moment he walked in. His eyes widened. "You framed it?" I nodded. "It's the first gift," I said softly, "you've ever given me that didn't cost me something." He didn't look hurt. He looked humbled. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said. "It didn't take long," I replied. "It took exactly the time it needed." He sat down on the sofa, glanced at the herbs in the kitchen, the dog sleeping by the door, the wall filled with watercolor sketches and travel photos. "This place looks happy," he said. "It is," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I'm glad." Then with his voice barely a whisper, he added, "I think I'm finally starting to understand what being a son actually means." And I smiled, because I believed him. I never intended to write a book. It started as journal entries, scribbled between dance classes and herb garden planting, notes of reflection on afternoons spent alone after years of being everyone's safety net. I wrote about the day I canceled Ethan's credit cards, about the first meal I cooked just for myself, about Eleanor's words echoing over a Patagonian glacier. "You don't owe your children the destruction of yourself." Those pages sat on my kitchen table for months. I had no plans for them. Until one morning, Camilla read a few while waiting for Michael to finish his cereal. She closed the journal, looked at me with wet eyes, and said, "Other women need this, Margaret. You have no idea how many do." I didn't believe her, but she printed 5 pages and sent them to a friend who ran a blog for women over 60. The blog owner shared them anonymously under the title, "The Day I Became My Own Person Again." It went viral. Thousands of comments poured in. Women from across the country, some grandmothers, some single, some caring for adult children who drained them emotionally, wrote to say, "This is me. I thought I was the only one. You gave me permission to say no." A publisher contacted me 2 weeks later. I laughed when they suggested turning the journal into a memoir. "I'm not a writer," I said. The editor smiled over the Zoom call. "You're a storyteller. That's better." And so, slowly, The Worth of a Mother was born. I wrote every morning from 7 to 9, with Beethoven curled at my feet and peppermint tea steaming beside me. I wrote honestly, without glamorizing my pain or polishing the rough edges of guilt and resentment. I wrote about motherhood, love, loss, and what it means to reclaim yourself at an age when most people assume your story is over. The memoir was released the following spring, a small print run, modest press, but it sold out in 2 weeks. Libraries requested more copies. Book clubs reached out. And then the invitations came from women's conferences, resilience panels, senior empowerment retreats. At first I hesitated. "I'm not a speaker," I told Eleanor over the phone. "You weren't a painter either," she said, "until you picked up a brush." So I stood on a stage in Chicago, wearing my most comfortable flats and a blazer Peter said made me look seriously important. The crowd of 300 women stared up at me as I adjusted the mic. "I'm not here to tell you how to be a good mother," I began. "I'm here to remind you that being a mother doesn't mean forgetting you're also a person." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, women lined up to hug me. Some whispered, "I left him after reading your story." Others said, "I called my daughter and told her I need space." One woman sobbed as she said, "I'm 74 and I'm just now learning to say no." That was when I knew. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. The forgotten mothers, the quiet caretakers, the women who gave and gave until they disappeared inside someone else's dreams. With Camila's help, I launched a campaign called Live for You, starting today. It offered online workshops, peer mentorship groups, and monthly letters written by women who had chosen to stop being martyrs and start being whole. We covered topics like how to set emotional boundaries with adult children, redefining purpose after 60, the guilt trap, why self-care isn't selfish, healing when your child betrays your trust, loving without losing yourself. Each month, the letters reached over 10,000 subscribers. We hosted webinars with guest speakers, therapists, authors, social workers, and I mentored a small group of women one-on-one, many of whom had never told a soul how exhausted they were. One woman, Gloria, 82, said, "My son hasn't spoken to me in 5 years, except to ask for money. I thought I was broken. You made me realize I'm just tired of being used." Another, Anna, 68, whispered, "I don't even know what I like anymore. I've been a mother so long I forgot how to be Anna." Together we helped each other remember. The movement spread. A small book turned into something bigger, not a revolution, but a quiet uprising of dignity, of women reclaiming their names, their time, their worth. I never received any awards, no magazine covers, no morning show interviews. But one day I received a letter from a woman in Texas. It read simply, "Because of you, I opened a savings account in my own name for the first time ever. I feel free." I pinned it to my wall, just beneath the painting Ethan had given me. Quiet glory, no fireworks, no applause, just the slow blooming of lives once silenced. And that, I realized, was more than enough. The invitation came in the form of a handwritten note, tucked between the pages of a book Ethan returned during one of his quiet Sunday visits. "Mom, it read. There's a town called Wexler's Creek, population 2,800. No full-time clinic, no pediatrician, no dentist. I've been volunteering once a month. I'd like you to come with me next time. Not as my mother, as my partner. There was no signature, no flourish, just a date, a time, and a postscript. Bring comfortable shoes. The last time Ethan and I had traveled together, he was 15, sulking in the back seat while Frank and I tried to cheer him up with gas station snacks on a road trip to Yellowstone. I remember a silence between us then, different from the one we carried now. Back then, it was filled with teenage resistance. Now, it was filled with careful understanding. The following Saturday, I stood outside with a small duffel bag and a notebook tucked under my arm. Ethan pulled up in a beat-up truck that stuttered a little when it stopped. He stepped out, and for the first time, he looked like someone I didn't need to worry about. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, getting in. We drove for 3 hours, mostly in silence, save for the occasional comment about scenery or weather. It wasn't awkward, it was restful. A rhythm formed. He drove. I read. He hummed to the radio. I dozed off with the sun warming my face. Wexler's Creek was exactly a small town as its name implied. The clinic was housed in an old church, its steeple still intact, though the bell was long gone. Inside, folding chairs lined the entryway. A makeshift reception desk sat beneath a faded stained glass window. Ethan introduced me as a wellness volunteer. I was in charge of blood pressure readings and distributing herbal care kits I'd made with Peter in the kitchen, each one filled with dried lavender, peppermint, and notes on how to ease joint pain or tension naturally. For the first time, we worked side by side. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't have to. He moved with quiet compassion, crouching to speak eye level with children, calling patients by name, remembering an old man's favorite joke. And I watched. I helped. I was useful, not because I was his mother, but because I had something to give. During a lunch break, we sat under a tree outside the clinic, sandwiches in hand, dusty from the wind. Ethan looked at me carefully. "Did you ever think I'd change?" I chewed slowly, considering the question. "No," I said honestly, "but I hoped." He blinked, surprised by the bluntness. And hope, I added, wasn't about waiting. It was about walking forward, even when you don't know who might catch up. A silence fell between us again, but this time it was full. He nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. "That's what I've been doing too, walking forward." I turned to look at him. There were lines in his face I hadn't noticed before, not from stress, but from growth, from resilience. His hands were tanned now, calloused not from entitlement, but from work. "You've become someone," I said. "Not who I wanted you to be, but someone you built from the ground up." He smiled, looking out at the kids playing in the dirt lot nearby. "I like him better." I didn't say, "So do I." I didn't have to. As the sun began its slow descent, the clinic started packing up. Volunteers loaded boxes into trucks. Children waved goodbye with sticky fingers and open grins. A woman pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Back at the truck, Ethan opened the passenger door for me. I turned to him before getting in. For a moment, we just stood there. No scripts, no roles, not mother, not son. Just two people who had walked their separate roads and found a common path again, not by going back, but by moving forward. And then he did something neither of us had done in years. He hugged me, not as an apology, not as a plea, just presence. Solid, quiet, warm. I closed my eyes and let myself be held, not because he needed me, but because after everything, we were both still here.